And if you have not played Extreme Rock, Paper, Scissors, I suggest you ask some of your kids how to play Extreme Rock, Paper, Scissors. And I was thrilled because it is something that I've shown adults, and like I've done, I taught the teachers at Stony Brook how to play it a little while ago, and it's basically you start as an egg, play rock, paper, scissors, and then the winner then becomes a chicken, and then the chickens find each other and they play rock, paper, scissors, and then the winner then becomes like a dragon, or they were creating dinosaurs or whatever. So you can see kids in different sizes in the classroom, and they were so excited to come and find me. I never really made it past egg because I just kept losing all the time, and they were so excited to beat me, and it was just awesome. So I would share that with everybody. The last thing, specifically last week, I know I appreciate everybody's support when, we sent out the message just about Friday with all the TikTok issues that have been going around the country. And I just wanted to really show my appreciation for Chief Chambers and for Detective Bernadine. I think they were fantastic in communicating with us early on and talking with us. And in addition to that, one of the things that I've learned just as a superintendent is just the number of times that I would also need to interact also with Chief Targ of the fire department. A couple of things have happened where we've had different alarm signals issues, and he's always quick to address the situation and then send a fire patrol to the school, because that happened recently at Crisafulli too. In like the middle of the night, the alarm wasn't sending the appropriate signal, so before the morning he had appropriate people there investigating, and then had somebody stationed there, to support the school until they could fix it. And so I just want to, publicly say thank you to both Chief Chambers and Chief Targ, because I think it's great to see all the different support that they provide us that we don't always talk about. That's it.
Great, thank you. School committee updates. Valerie.
Well, I guess whether as chair of finance committee or just as a member, I was going to just share for anyone watching who may not also watch select board that they approved a few of the ARPA requests from phase 1. The total of requests approved that in their meeting last week was $247,550, and the ones that applied to schools were de-escalation training for elementary principal aides, and the second half of the year funding for our district-wide nurse who's in charge of the test and stay program, and also the Abbott ADA stage accessibility chairlift that was part of the capital plan but really has a sense of urgency. So that was on the ARPA list and they approved that. There are additional phase 1 requests from the schools that will be revisited in January and just didn't have the same urgency to approve before the end of the calendar year. And those are a 5th hour of the elementary math interventionists for next school year. I'm sure maybe some of you remember from if you toured the elementary schools, that was a resounding message from the math interventionists, is that 5th hour was really helpful this year. Also, the Alexia subscription for next school year and the Panorama subscription for next school year. So those are on the phase 1 request list, and I'll update again as they get reviewed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia.
So policy subcommittee met, and we'll be discussing policy later on tonight. But we did also start to work on, actually we've pretty much finished for the first round of the review of the meetings policies. Just to bring everyone up to speed, a little while ago, the state repealed a couple MGLs and then reissued them as far as how your meetings are held and OML and things like that. We are in compliance with everything, but our language just needed to be updated to reflect those new MGLs and to better reflect what we actually do in practice. Things like we now meet between the end of the school year and the beginning of the school year to have that meeting where we talk about protocol, et cetera. So we've refreshed some of our policies. Those will be coming in the new year. There's no urgency because, like I said, we are in compliance with everything that we're doing. We just need to make sure that our policies are up to date.
Thank you so much. Other school committee updates? Okay. Hannah, student update.
Well, we have winter sports going on. The basketball game, they were giving free T-shirts to the first 100 fans, so it's a big turnout. I think WADA is doing a performance this week. They're Whitmas, WADA, like Christmas. But other than that, this is the last week before break, so I think everyone is just really swamped in tests and projects. So everyone's excited for the new year. Good. That's all I have.
Thank you. Yes, the Westford Improv Troupe Witness performance, which I think is, I want to say Thursday after school. I think it's a half day Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Thursday after school. Okay. Thanks again, Hannah. And with that, we'll move on to business. The 7:30 agenda item is Westford polling location consolidation. And we are fortunate enough to have guests to speak to that. And so just the preface on that is that, and Patty will get to this too, but Westford earned, with population growth, earned another precinct for voting, so we're up to 7. And that triggered a look at where we vote. And right now it's at 5 different schools and what we might want that to look like going forward. And since it is at our schools, it made sense for this group to hear about that and to help support and weigh in where necessary. I'll hand it over to you, Patty.
Well, thank you. This is John Ricketson. He is on the Board of Registrars, and tonight I'm going to let him be the color man, and he'll do play-by-play, and I'll be the color man, sorry. But basically, Chris has given you my little rundown spiel before I was even going to begin. He was part of my working group that I formed, a couple of different people from various different committees and things in town. I had Chris Sanders, I had Dr. Chu as well. We took a tour of Westford Academy with Principal Antonelli, with other members of the working group, which were 2 wardens, that work on election day, one of whom is a League of Women Voters member. We had a member of the Commission on Disability with us, because that's important, voter access to places. I had, there was me, there was my assistant town clerk, and I think that I haven't forgotten anyone, and if I have, they'll let me know. But we're going to give you a sneak peek of what we're going to be showing the select board, and I'm going to let John take care of that for me, if he would.
Can we have a presentation in the packet, a couple slides? Do you want me to bring those up?
That would be very
Please.
helpful. Just there's a 2-page handout that looks like this.
It'll show up behind me momentarily.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm John Ricketson. We are 2 of the 4 members of the Board of Registrars, and we're here as one town committee to solicit input from another town committee. We, in the middle of January, will be submitting our recommendations to the select board for changes to the voting locations. And your input would be helpful on the options we're facing, which I introduced tonight. Your input would also be helpful about a couple of other issues like emergency planning, which will come up. So if you're looking at that first page, we're evaluating this in this is a summary of the criteria we're using to sort this out. It's actually a more complicated issue than it might appear at first. There are issues about how to encourage voter participation, and particularly to retain voter participation in our town. There's also issues about election security and managing of elections, which are really important for everyone in the town to consider, as well as how convenient the voting might be to each individual voter. So these are sort of between encouraging participation and the management and the security. The criteria sort of fall into those 2 categories. So first, as a criteria, let's try to minimize change. It's easiest to go vote where you did before, and but certain change is going to be driven in this upcoming year. We have new voting machines replacing machines that were decades old. We have, the census has driven the precinct changes, excuse me, adding a new precinct. And as you might imagine, there's a focus both here and around the country about election management and making sure that elections are run well. So some of that change is going to, so whatever changes we do, let's make sure that we're minimizing any confusion about that. And obviously, how to get to the polls is an important thing. The driving, the parking, the commuter disruption on your way, and the need to accommodate anticipated growth in our town. That would be something to consider. Handicapped access and long walking distances are an issue in certain of our polling locations now. And what certainly is the case in our small town is that voting for the volunteers and others that are there at the local sites where that has been generally, we'd like to continue to promote a small town character, even if we do some consolidation of the voting locations. So those are the issues from a voter perspective. And from the management and election security perspective, this is what we have been certainly wrestling with on our committee. We'd like to reduce the pressure on the election staff that manages elections. For example, when we have new machines, we need to have people supporting those machines, and it is a lot easier to support that in a single location. It's also, whenever there's an issue, we have town staff that needs to be able to go to those locations and set everything up and tear things down. That is an issue, and I certainly, is something that I've learned since I've been on the committee, how important that is to keep the, to make sure that we don't get, well, just to make sure that that is well run and so that we don't have any risk of problems in the elections in our town. Certainly reducing impact on the schools is the main reason why we're here, to get input from you all. Right. What has been implemented in the last several years is closing the schools during the elections, and in this upcoming year we're going to have 3 different elections. So that means closing the schools for 3 days. That has an impact, but particularly as we're understanding it, an impact on the elementary school, less of an impact maybe on the older students in town. No matter what our plan is, we need to have an adequate emergency and contingency plan. And for example, if we want to consolidate all voting into Westford Academy, we need some plans to deal with contingencies there. And that's one of the options I'll be presenting in a moment. And finally, whatever we do, let's communicate this very clearly, because there will be some changes and we want to manage that right. So that covers how we're evaluating this. So if you go to the next page, it gives an overview of what the options are and a map of the town. It's helpful for everyone to see where those voting locations are in town. We need to use the schools. That's our only option for locations. And in general, those locations are bunched fairly much in the center of town, except for Rita Miller up in the north. There's never been a close location for Westford residents in the south of town, and that's just the way it works in terms of locations. So here are the options that we're considering. Option A would be to consolidate all voting in the town into a single location. Ironically, the one school that would welcome this is a school that we're not currently using for voting, and that's Westford Academy. And there is adequate parking. The school would be closed during that time, and the town staff is very confident in their ability to manage the operations of an election in that facility, and we can go into more detail about that if you wish. Option B would be to split between Westford Academy and Stony Brook, two locations that are that work very well for managing elections, and the consideration for that option is some of the residents north of town, particularly the ones used to going to Rita Miller, would have an easier time getting to Stony Brook, and we could put 4 precincts into Westford Academy and the other 3 precincts into Stony Brook. In a similar vein, there's an option C, which is sort of oriented to the issues of the east and the west part of town. Rita Miller and Abbott are 2 locations that serve the eastern side of town, and the western side of town, really anyone voting there could easily get to Westford Academy. So that was the thinking in terms of options B and C, as a way to sort of have lesser locations, easier management in terms of consolidation, but B and C being a nod to some of the issues of access for certain voters. Option D would be the minimum change. We have 1 new precinct. We could retain the voting locations the way they are and add that new precinct into one of the existing locations, most likely Stony Brook. While that has the benefit of minimum change, it does not help with many of the other issues that we're concerned about. And to be honest, that of those 4 options, that would be the least favored from the Board of Directors, Board of Registrars perspective at this point. I think that sums up the overview I wanted to give to you, and we can use the rest of our time for any questions you have, and Patty can chime in as our expert witness.
I'll start with the question of, can you review the timeline of the decision-making, when the state needs to know, all of that?
That is true. So the precincts themselves are pretty much finalized. The select board has, as you can see, the different colors. Those are the 7 precincts that we have in town now, and the lines are drawn, and it's all according to population. You can only have 4,000 residents. That doesn't mean voters, that's residents in a precinct. And we were pretty well tapped out. The 110 building did that for us. That gave us 7 precincts. Every 10 years they do this. In 2030, there could be another one. I wouldn't be surprised, but we shall see, because even with the 7 precincts, we're almost hitting, we're at 32, 33, 3,500 people in a precinct. It suddenly skyrocketed. So where was I going with all this now? Oh, the state. So the state, it's approved. We sent our map into the state. The state comes back and says, okay, now send it to, we like that. That looks pretty good. Send it to your select board. They approved the 7 precinct lines because it's drawn. And then it goes to another state independent council who will say and give it its blessing and whatever, which is supposed to happen by December 31st. Haven't heard anything yet. Not a single town or city has. So when I wanted to send out my census and let everybody know their new precinct, because apparently, obviously, everybody below 110 is going to be precinct 7, that was a way, I have to notify everyone. It was a way of letting everyone know by the census exactly. Well, now I'm going to have to do postcards, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, where was I even going? Because I wander, don't I, Jim? Right? We got together to look at them all, and we thought that perhaps we should look at the locations. I will tell you that we've done a lot of work on this. My working group was great. You had a lot of different perspectives. We had the Board of Registrars take a look at it. I'm wavering between A and B. My stumbling block is just our police chief had asked me to make sure that I had a contingency plan if something happened at the academy. any type of thing, you know, maybe Patton Road is blocked and people can't get in there and vote, where are they gonna go? Something happens with the building, any type of thing, and he's on the, and as I think many of you are on the Town and School Safety Task Force, so this is an issue, and it's something that I have to have in place. So it seems that this is where I'm sort of looking to the school committee to maybe give me some guidance if you're interested in my consolidation plan. Obviously, they're your buildings that you maintain, that I use, so I want to make sure we work together with it and everybody's happy with it. If, for instance, we took Westford Academy and put all 7 in there, if something happened, I need to have a place where we pack everything up and go. So where could that be? Would that be the middle schools? Could I put them in the gym? School might be going on, but we've had voting before when there's students in there. I don't know how you feel about that. It would be an upheaval anyway the whole day because nobody's planning on this, but you have to know every option. If it was Stony Brook and Westford Academy, well then apparently Blanchard would also be closed. You can't close one middle school and not the other. So is Blanchard the contingency place? You can do a lot of things with not a lot of room if you have to get by. You can also come to the town hall and place an absentee ballot if something was closed. Obviously, I can't have several thousand people coming to the town hall all at once. You always plan elections like it's the presidential election, which is where you get all your volume. You only get that once every 4 years. Typically, if we're lucky, we get 5,000 to 6,000 people voting. The governor will be maybe 10. The presidential election's more like 15, 16s. There is early voting, which has become quite popular. The moment the state has not, as of the 15th, early voting has sort of just stopped because the legislature is not in session. I don't see that that's not going to continue, though, when they get back into session. That was an extremely popular option for folks. So the presidential election, more than half of the votes, 11,000 people voted early. That's why I look and talk the way I am now. And anyway, we don't get as many people coming to the polls in person as we used to. So that's another reason why I'm looking to the 1 or 2 locations. I've looked into other towns. We've done a lot of research on this. Many towns are going to this option and have in the last 20 years. They use their high school or a large facility in their town. It works out pretty well. It's always, you got to have that other place just in case. So I guess I'll leave it there, and if you have questions for John or I, please ask me. I'll see if I know the answer.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
Chime
if
in?
you wanted to chime in.
So I was able, like you said, I was able to tour the buildings with you, and that was super helpful for me because then I saw what the needs were that you were talking about. So my suggestion, if you did look at the academy, right, and you still need a contingency plan, then I think the contingency of using both of the middle schools is totally viable, right? Because you could easily have 4 of the precincts go to Blanchard and 3 of the precincts go to Stony Brook, or you could really even flip that as well too, because of the size of the cafeteria at Blanchard and the gym at Blanchard. You could really do the same thing. I appreciate the desire to not impact elementary schools. But when we were touring that day, that was the first time anybody had mentioned to me the idea that all other schools would be in session except for the academy if we went to the academy. And I just don't foresee that happening. I wouldn't suggest that. I think we shouldn't have school on election days. And I know that there's a year where there'll be 3, but I feel like we have to deal with that in our calendar, which allows you access to the other buildings. We would use the other buildings for professional development as well. But I wouldn't necessarily anticipate all of the schools, the elementary schools specifically, being in session while the academy wasn't. we did start to talk about it. There might be some creative things that we could think about, but like right now, like the state isn't going to give us permission to have one remote day for the academy or something like that. That's not something that would be on their, that they would be looking to let us do. So to me, I feel like it's more important that there's a plan that school isn't in session, which also then would allow, if the contingency was to go to 2 different buildings, you would just be able to do that without worrying about displacing the students. If that was the case, and for some reason we decided that school was in session, then we could look at that. We have very specific emergency plans for our buildings, if something were to happen at a building, where we would go, and so I feel like we could also share some of that information with you, internally, for you to just to understand that, we have these resources in play already if that we needed a contingency. So I would suggest that if you did go with the one location at the academy, which I did see, and yes, Principal Antonelli thought it was a great idea, I thought it was a great idea, and then if you had a contingency, have the 2 middle schools be the contingency for it.
So for the Westford Academy location, it is far actually from the rest of the town. Well, currently in middle school, there are a lot of like Asian population voting in the middle school. When they actually go home, getting off the highway, they can just go to middle school to vote. Traveling from that to actually in the rush hour over, going to Cold Spring, going through like Forge Village, Patton Road, that's like a nightmare, for example, in the mornings when the kids are in school. So if everybody is rushing, trying to actually get to vote, and then that traffic could be really a big hurdle for people. For example, they wouldn't be able to get in that time. That's my concern.
Oh, the kids won't be at school, so at least that's alleviated.
Yeah, the kids wouldn't be school, but if people are actually all rushing to actually cast a vote before 8 p.m. and then traffic is so bad, that could be a hurdle.
We have thought of that.
Gloria.
I'm a huge fan of consolidating to Westford Academy. I think it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of being a voter and having been a candidate. I think it provides a huge clarity of message, to a low frequency or new voter, to just be able to tell everyone in town to go to Westford Academy. It makes it very simple. It makes it very straightforward in terms of clarity of messaging to voters. In terms of the spirit of voting being a community activity, I mean, that's one of the things that the people who attend town meeting like about town meeting, is you get to see people that you may not see at other times of year, and have chats with them about local issues. Having everyone vote at one location would have that same feel. It also provides access to local candidates for local races. If you had a question for a school committee candidate, you show up at Westford Academy, odds are they're going to be standing there with a sign, and you can ask them directly. So from a perspective of having been a candidate and a voter, I think there are a lot of advantages there. From the perspective of being of a school committee member, I do think there's a huge advantage to getting the voting out of our elementary schools. We might still be closing those schools, but it provides us flexibility going forward with our calendar and with the way we do our professional development that we currently don't have. Our professional development days are locked into election days. And having that flexibility moving forward over the course of the next decade, because who knows how we might want to evolve our calendar or our professional development, I would rather have that flexibility built in. And also just security concerns. We certainly have had people voice concerns about, you've got the population coming in and out of an elementary school. When kids were there, that was one of the reasons why we started the closures, but also they're just still coming in and out of elementary schools. And I think parents would be very supportive of this, having all of the voting consolidated to one location at a high school. I think people will just be more comfortable with that. I think it buys us a lot of flexibility going forward. I would suggest, you said you were wavering with AB, I would suggest don't waver. I'm a huge fan of option A. This is a good opportunity to make a change that I think would benefit voting in Westford, and we should take advantage of the opportunity and make that change. And then if in 2030 there's an eighth precinct, where's it going to go? Westward Academy. Easy. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it would help alleviate some issues and give some nice benefits going forward.
Can I say one
Yeah,
thing?
please.
I just want to clarify for anybody who may be listening and saying, wait, everybody's voting at the academy? There will be your separate precincts.
Yep.
You would go to each precinct where you belong, and you'll never be at the wrong place. I've had many times, people say, oh, there's a vote here sign, and they go in and they can't vote there because that's not their precinct. This is, we'll work it out, a lot of signage, and plan, and we'll have it. I'm also planning on hopefully using some of the students at Westford Academy, because the history teachers over there have always said, is there something they can do on election day? We want to get them involved, and we'd love to, but the only place where we had more than one precinct, as you know, is the Abbott School. And there wasn't a whole lot they could do there, but this is, one side, I just have a lot of ideas of what they could possibly actually do to help. We had a couple of your students in the presidential election, and I made them poll workers. I think they liked it. They're off in college, and they haven't talked to me since, so I'm not sure, but I think they did, so.
And I think I'm compelled by the convenience of having it in a central location and the flexibility as far as we add precincts. I think that's a huge factor that we would presumably not have to do this again, that Westford Academy would accommodate us for the foreseeable future. And I love the idea of the communal spirit of having it in one location. Because, the existing polling locations are pretty sparse. It's pretty sparse activity, right? Even in presidential, it never really gets crowded. And I like the idea of knowing that you're going to see everyone who's going to vote that day at that location. And I think the impact to your staff is probably the biggest factor in making this sustainable going forward. Alicia?
So I will admit I've never gone to to the wrong building, but I walk into Abbott every year and think, am I 1 or 3? Am I 1 or 3? Every single time. So I wonder about, so you said we wouldn't necessarily get permission from the state to have one building not in session that day, but how do we reconcile that now for when we have elementary conferences and those kids don't have school, but other grades do? How is that accounted for in the 180? Because I wonder if there's something we could do that would be, like you said, maybe something like a day of service or maybe an asynchronous day or something just for the high school if we had all of the others and it didn't conflict with professional development, and you would then have more flexibility in professional development in other places.
It does map out, because in October, when the academy has their
Okay.
curriculum night, the students don't have school that day.
That makes
But
sense.
the problem is that then it's
Right.
then moving that to align that with an election wouldn't work.
Right. Okay. I forgot about the curriculum night.
But you're right, it does even out. And, something like that can happen
Yep.
in an emergency, in which case, we can deal with different schools.
Mhm.
But it's the idea of planning it,
Yes.
which is what I wouldn't recommend.
Right. So my other question is actually for you all. A lot of what we have talked about for accessibility, having a building that's more accessible, having a central location. I do have concerns about some of our older population in town and having them being able to access rides to the polls, et cetera. Consolidating it to one place seems like a great idea for that, because then we could perhaps do something like, have you considered using like the shuttle vans from I'm sure you already have from Cameron, to be able to transport people across town, because you're right, that distance from Miller is huge. It's going to be the biggest one. So that would be my only concern with consolidating just to Westford Academy. But beyond that, I think for all of the other reasons stated, I'm very much in support of that.
Good to know.
So, John, real quick, Pat or John, can you guys elaborate? Is there been any discussion about what aspect of WA would be used? We're not just talking 7 precincts and the gymnasium, right?
Right. The plan we have, and I would obviously run it by you, but is in the cafeteria, The lower cafeteria could hold 2 precincts and the upper would have 1. So they have their own entrance over there. You'd park by the football field and that's how you'd come in. The other side of the building, the large gym, could actually hold all 4. One of my little working group people sent me over the big plan today, and this is what he does, and obviously in his spare time. Although Chris gave me the driving things too, so anyway, I'm smiling behind the mask. They were wonderful. I picked all the right people. They were great. And so they would fit very easily. But was it Jim or perhaps you, Dr. Chu, who said there's the small gym is there too?
That's
So
right.
you also have that option as well. And yes, Principal Antonelli seemed very, very accommodating and very eager to help us out with that. So that was
And
very
the other thing that when we walked even around the building, looking at the different entrances to the building with appropriate signage, with high school
Right.
students and other people, volunteers outside, helping people park in the right place, it could be really close. If they did make a mistake, then it's still the same building. So it's just a
Exactly.
question of, oh, I'm not in this room, I'm in that room,
Mhm.
which I think was good.
Right. In the past, when we've done the precincts back in 2010, our GIS guy, he did a big map,
Yeah.
and you can see just your precinct and what's in it. And, I think the students can help with that a lot, because they seem to like giving directions, and, and then people get used to it. That most people aren't gonna have a big change. I know myself, I live in Forge Village, and in 2000, I was in precinct 2, in 2010, I was in precinct 4, then I'm back to precinct 2, and I'm on the line, and a lot of people have that, and we all just go, yeah, okay. And you go down Boston Road, and half one side is one side, because that's how the state has to divide lines. They need some sort of designation to be able to do it. But there's not usually a problem, but sometimes if maybe you don't vote all that often, and it's a presidential election, I've got to go vote, and you have no idea, none. I don't know what it is. So, you have to have all those things in place. So we would work on that. Once something was finalized where it would be, we would get going on the next phase of it, of how to get it properly put together.
Other comments or questions?
If it's all gonna be just in Westford Academy, like the town meeting, can we get the food trucks? They were very successful. Talk about building community. It was nice having lunch with people that day.
Yeah.
So we appreciate this update. I think what we were thinking was that we would then, and so we try to, if we're gonna take a vote on something, and we did talk about, perhaps we wanna vote to make a recommendation or vote of support or approval of a plan. We try to spread it out over 2 meetings, so we have time to put it out to the public, and they hear the presentation, and then people can get, their feedback to us, or come to the next meeting during public comment. So that's what we're eyeing right now, is that at our next meeting on January 10th, the day before you go to the select board, we would have some sort of a vote of recommendation or approval. And
Okay.
And so in the meantime, what we can do is we can stay in contact to see where you are with your analysis of it, whether it be looking at the contingencies and emergency procedures, things like that, and then as we come up to that meeting on the 10th, if you have any further information that you thought we should know, or a further way that you're leaning, we can get that from you and
Perfect.
build that into our vote.
Well, I thank you very much for the time and all the input. It's very helpful. Thank you so much. Everybody have a
Yes.
nice holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an exciting opportunity to reimagine where we vote, but I know you put a lot into this,
It
and
is.
as you do all of the elections, so I'm looking forward to seeing where we vote with this.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Nomination papers, January 3rd.
Oh, my God.
Just letting you know.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna move on to the 750 item, which is the FY23 budget update.
Very good. So let's look at the timeline first. So in the packet, Pat had updated the timeline, and so there's a proposed timeline for you to look at. The real big change was that at one time we had talked about tonight being the initial budget presentation. And then I'm gonna share some thoughts about our progress so far, but in looking at the change with town meeting, looking at the change with when the other budget timelines as well too, we think that moving the presentation to January 10th not only allows us to gather more information, allows us to continue to work with the subcommittee as well too. So that was a part of that. And if you look at thank you. So if you look at the bold items, those are then what was adjusted afterwards. Thank you. So we have the January 10th being the initial presentation, and then over the 18th and the 31st, deliberations, depending on questions. In the past, we've certainly added additional meetings if we were looking at the specific timeline. The interesting thing here now is that, so the town manager is preliminarily looking to present the budget on February 8th, and right now we have the March 10th is what we're looking at as our meeting with the FinCom and the Select Board as well too. So that gives us more time in January to keep discussing it. So there's a tentative vote on the 31st, but that's not even something that we're saying we have to do. I just wanted you to see how we adjusted everything accordingly on the timeline. So once we are in January, based on your feedback, based on questions, I think we can talk about whether or not additional meetings are needed to be scheduled, or whether we feel like we could just continue to have the discussions at our regular meetings, knowing that we have time. The goal is that before anything is then presented and discussed with the FinCom and the Select Board on March 10th, that you would have voted and on your approval to the budget. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions about that? No? Okay, very good. Pat, was there anything else that you wanted to chime? Okay, thank you. And I think the town meeting has officially been set for June 11th. Is that correct? Thank you, Nita. Yeah. So now if you look at, I did have, and we'll post these to the packet. I just came up with some talking points just to talk about the FY23 progress so far this evening. And so Chris is going to share that. Thank you very much. So that is a really lovely slide. We can move to the next one. I wanted it to just be. I do. Well, I mean, we can have. Well, I will say. Well, it is Carrie. It is Times New Roman. Right? She didn't let me keep it at Arial, but I did get to not add a theme. I was like, "Is this theme okay?" She's like, "There is no theme." I said, "That's correct."
Carrie's the theme master.
She is the theme master, and so I decided, you know what, for this initial just basic budget presentation, because this isn't the budget presentation January 10th, where there will be a theme. We will make sure that it looks very nice, right? I'm like, no, this can just be.
I like it.
Google Slides. But we did, at least it has been upgraded to Times New Roman. So it's not just the default. But we can go to the second slide. So what I wanted to share with you is, I mean, granted, I'm clearly learning a lot in my first year here, right? And so one of the things that we just wanted to focus this is what we have learned so far. So if you saw on the original timeline, the fact that Pat mentioned closing out the FY21 budget in August. So just for our own purposes too, I want to remind you that Pat joined us on July 26th. So I'm talking about July, but we're really talking about August. And in August, she had to hire an entire staff because there was only one person that was remaining. So you all remember the fun that we were having over the summer there. So in all of that, I just, again, want to say I'm so thankful and grateful for the work that Pat has been doing and has been doing since she got here. And one of the things that I've learned is just the challenge of, first of all, being new. The first thing she's asked to do is close out FY21. And then we really need to start immediately thinking about FY23. And that's before she's had any real chance to get to know FY22, right? So that's just an interesting way for people to remember the bookend there, is that then she's like, and meanwhile we're paying people, making sure bills are getting paid, and so there's that aspect, and we're hiring and training. an entire new office. So again, much appreciation, Pat. The interesting thing was that what we discovered right away was that there was this $800,000 surplus that was new information for Pat and I. And it was something that we believe was being communicated because it was not a surprise. Our concern immediately was this going to be a surprise either to you and or more importantly to the town? But there had been discussions about it, so they were prepared for that. But that $800,000 surplus, which was due to COVID funds and just to a decrease in consumables and things that we were purchasing for classrooms, because classrooms they were only half full at a time, and sometimes not even then. So that was an initial thing in July. The other thing that we started looking at right away is that we had to have the October 4th was the deadline for that Sr3 Initial Submittal. So we talked to you in late September. We did the survey, got information, and that's where we were thinking that the Sr3 funds, applying that to full-day kindergarten, was the direction that we wanted to start exploring. And so we started looking at that. We started looking at that budget timeline. We started looking to see how we could break that down over the course of the 6 to 7 years that we had shown you in the other presentation. And so that started in October 21. And then it was in November when Pat was really able to, I think, get the first initial analysis of FY23 together by looking at the actuals and looking at the historical information specifically to try to build up the FY23 budget, that initial analysis. And with that, the initial analysis is looking like it's indicating approximately a 3.6% increase. Now the thing, when we were looking at that, we're like, okay, well, why was this? And it was a little bit different at first too. And then we started looking at enrollments. We started looking at different things. We were making sure we worked on it collaboratively, which was fantastic. Pat sat down with me and Carrie and Courtney, and we went line by line through the entire budget, which was a wonderful activity that we've been doing over the course of weeks. One of the things that we were specifically looking at and we were reminded of in the beginning was that last year's budget, there was the difference of $889,091. So if you remember back in the initial budget conversation in 22, we were talking about there was a difference of $441,000. And in that presentation, it included 4-tier busing. So that $444,000 was being saved by going to the 4-tier busing, and then we decided we weren't going to do that, and that gave a difference of $889,000 over what the town's allotment was, right? So if you look in the parentheses there, the initial allotment from the town was the $62 million. And so we had a shortfall of the $889,091. $596,511 was made up of one-time funds. ESSER2, an additional section of school choice. There was a one-time cost savings in the third year of the bus contract that they had identified, so that's a part of that. There was some professional development money that was also identified, and then other ways that they closed that gap was with the bus
Reducing
fees,
a curriculum coordinator.
reducing the curriculum coordinator to the STEM coordinator, and sharing part of the facilities supervisor position as well too. So these are just kind of some memories of that. But in looking at that was explaining to us, okay, why are we looking at a 3.6 increase here, and how much of it is something that has not been considered in, I think honestly, the same way that we considered the FDK rollout over years of using the ESSER funds and then slowly coming off of that. Instead, we're just looking at 1 year's use of one-time funds without a specific plan to bring that and carve that back into the budget, okay? Another additional thing that we noticed this year immediately with the budget was that the transportation for special education in FY22 was initially budgeted at $500,000. And one of the things that Pat and Courtney saw tracking early in November was that we're on course right now to be closer to $800,000. So that's something that Pat is looking at for the FY23 budget. So that's an increase there that they're paying attention to. So those are things that we learned as we've been looking at what we're looking to present in January. Okay.
And so, Chris,
yeah, thank you.
just to clarify, so the 3.6% is what we're looking at requesting in FY23. It's 3.6 higher than the town allocation, but if you look at that first black round bullet, it's really only a 2.2% increase over our total budget that was planned for FY22, which is $889,000 over the town allocation.
So I'm feeling like we have this hole of around $889,091 that we still have to work ourselves off of,
Right.
if that makes sense.
So the 62 million was allocated by town, plus what we need for another 889,000. That's the real spending for FY22.
Yes.
And then the 3.6 is over the 62 million. So if it's the actual spending of FY22 is 2.2%.
Well said.
Is
Yes.
that right?
That is right. That is correct. And
And the whole between the 3.6, the whole between the 2% is because there is a $889,000
That's right.
accounted for.
And some of this, when we break, and more details, we'll have more specific details when we're doing, in the January 10th presentation. But while you're looking at this, because this might jog, because you were all paying attention to this last year, right? One of the things too, when we're looking at this number here, the initial allocation from the town was the $62,099,287. The actual amount that was approved is higher than that by the Student Opportunity Act money, which is $137,000. Okay, but that is part of the 889 as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
So I could have also carved that out and put the SOA into the parentheses there, but that was the way that it was originally discussed last year, so I wanted to keep it the way it was discussed last year. But the way that Pat discovered it, because in order to look at the number, she really found it from the town vote, which was then the 62,288, I believe is what the,
So
anyway.
parentheses plus the student
Parentheses
opportunity.
plus the Student Opportunity Act. But the Student Opportunity Act was part of closing the gap.
Yep.
Okay.
So that money is not, we wanted to make sure it wasn't there twice.
Okay.
And it's not there twice. So back to what you said, Ming Chen is
Yeah.
still correct.
And just
then,
go ahead.
do we expect, like, for FY23, how much we're gonna get from the Student Opportunity Act? Do we have?
I was just Googling to see if I could find that.
Oh, okay. The governor
It's
had
determined, don't you know already? Or?
Right.
Well,
I feel like it's-
specifically what I was Googling was when, have we reached the point yet with where special education transportation is going to be reimbursable? Because it's supposed to be at some point, so that's what I was actually.
That's in March.
Okay,
in March.
That's in March. We've
Right.
been talking about that.
excellent, because I couldn't find that.
Right, that's the, what was the name of the specific?
Chris, I think those might be different things. I think that circuit breaker now includes transportation,
Right,
which is
yeah.
a new
Right. Yeah.
change. The other thing with the extraordinary is what you're.
Oh, the
referencing.
extraordinary, right,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
And to be clear, the 889,000 so it includes circuit breaker. I would.
No,
Does that come from the town budget?
Circuit breaker does not.
So it's accounted for in the 62.
So,
Yeah,
That's what I was trying
as
to
an
figure out.
offset.
Okay.
right,
It
so
is,
we'll,
okay.
right, so Pat has, what Pat
She's
has
getting
built.
serious now.
Well, I
This
just
is
feel
good.
like it's rude to the public for me to be speaking for
Yeah,
them.
no, thank you, Pat. But I'll say this, that's an excellent question. Those are things that we're gonna be more
Yep.
clearly delineated on January 10th. Because one of the things that I really appreciate is that the budget that Pat has built has included all of the different known offsets, as opposed to when in the past, sometimes we've looked at how everything grows and then where do the offsets come out? And so sometimes you're like, wait a second, is that a real number or is that not a real number in the same way? And so I feel like there are offsets that are already being considered in our FY23 number, but that is not reflected in the 62 million, back to your point.
Okay.
Okay.
Ally?
Just a clarification on the 596 number, does that include the Student Opportunity Act? Because that,
No.
okay, great, because that, to me, isn't one-time use fund, so I just want to double check.
No, it does not. Thank you
Okay.
for asking. No.
Yeah.
No, the one-time use, the 596, 511 was the ESSER, was ESSER 2 money. It was the one-time savings in the third year of the bus contract.
Yep.
It was 148,000 and change of school choice money.
Yep.
That was the final amount. So we were like, okay, that would be, we take that out of school choice to make that up. And then it was 13,000 specifically in professional development that Courtney Moran was able to identify, that she was able to not,
Apply to a grant.
yeah, she was
Okay.
able to, thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this slide?
I think I think I said the next slide. I think I
Okay.
actually talked about most of it. Because I was just talking about what we've been doing. So I already said that we've been doing a deep dive, looking at every single line, and very carefully. We're continuing to examine our enrollment numbers. I mean, we've heard from, George Murray, and we do know that the numbers are decreasing, and so we're making sure that that's reflective in the budget that we're building. And then just the fact that we've had some meetings with the Finance Subcommittee. We have another meeting scheduled on January 3rd. And then I have already shared the initial numbers with the town manager. Any questions?
Not a question, just a thank you, because I'm very appreciative of all the work that's being done from Pat's end, from your end, and especially the Finance Subcommittee. I'm very grateful for how much work we're getting to see done before we even get to the actual budget this year. It's phenomenal. Thank you. That's all.
And I would just echo just the appreciation for what you all are doing to really methodically and thoroughly go through this, get an understanding of it, and help communicate that understanding to us in a way that I think is, even at this early stage, is really going to be helpful. And it's going to lay a foundation for, I think, improved budgeting process for years to come. I just feel like I see that coming.
That is one of the things that I've said to Pat and we've talked about, because for you to have to figure out somebody else's work, right, is just difficult for anybody, right? But then it's one of those things where you don't know something, so you ask questions, you'll find somebody who will historically figure it out. And then I'm like, but you know what? Next year, you're going to know the answer to that question, which is awesome. So that's helpful.
I just wanted to echo the last two comments, because I feel like this is the direction we always talk about going, right? These kind of transparent conversations, so that no one is blindsided, so that we can see the work going into it. And I think we're kind of, to Chris's point, thinking about how, like, in this, as part of the Finance Subcommittee, we've been talking about what kinds of things in the spring can we do to set ourselves up for next year. And some of the conversations we're having right now, I think, are really promising about things that we have always talked about that are important to us, like evaluating the role school choice has in our operating budget and how to kind of use that sustainably. So I'm just really, I know it's kind of scary, right, and vulnerable to talk about a gap before a presentation, and to kind of share what work you're doing, and to have that transparent conversation with our town partners too, right? So all these things can be a little nerve-wracking, but I'm really happy that this is the direction we're going in, and it feels really promising that this is the way we're going. I'm just, hats off to everybody. Pats on back.
More to come. A lot more
Next
to come.
meeting.
Stay tuned.
In like 2 weeks.
Right.
3 weeks.
No, 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Right.
Yes, 3 weeks now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Something like that. All right. Thanks again. Next year.
Next year. That's a 2022 problem. That's in January.
Okay, policy. Discussion on our one new and one revised policy.
Okay, so we'll start with a motion to waive the reading of P5327 unanticipated bus route interruptions.
Second.
Motion from Alicia, second from Catherine. Any questions or discussion on that? All right, all in favor of waiving the readings? Unanimous?
Okay, so to remind everyone, the background on this is there was an event that happened in October where there was an interrupted bus route and there were students that were let off the bus at a location. There were parent concerns that were brought to the district. This is a rewrite of the policy. This is a new policy that is essentially taking the practices that are already happening in buildings and putting them into policy form. It's thanks to Jen Piper and the Transportation Office and the administration and working with D-Bus. This is the language they brought us. We tweaked it just a little bit. So far, the policy subcommittee has not had any other public comments other than from our policy meetings, the policy subcommittee meetings. We do have a couple questions for the administration going forward, but the floor is open for discussion on this policy. You maybe want me to start with my questions?
Sure.
So the questions that have come up through, we've had a couple members of the public join us at policy subcommittee, and then the policy subcommittee members had a couple questions. The first of which being, the language of the policy says that a safe location will be determined. The question came up, who is going to determine that safe location? The communication process for every age group would be different. So who is going to determine that and how will it be communicated to the parents was the second part of that question.
So the first piece with the safe location, I think the ultimate goal is that there are going to be multiple adults collaborating with each other, right? The safety personnel, talking with bus drivers, talking with, if in an ideal situation, there would be multiple people to talk about to determine where's the safest place. I will say that if, in the event that a bus driver discovers something and is not able to, and there isn't safety personnel there yet, then I think that's also going to be a different decision that the bus driver is going to be making where to go, but not leave students, right? That would then be whether they're all coming back or, but those are things that we can, I think, continue to make sure that we clarify. The second question was about who is going to be communicating?
So the policy says that the parents will be communicated to and that the building principal will decide if it needs an immediate communication or an after-the-fact communication, which sort of depends on the time of day, are you arriving or leaving, that sort of thing. So I think what we're mostly looking for here is communication to the parents from the principal saying, if something happens, this is how we will let you know. If it's going to be a district-wide robocall, if it's going to be an email, just to let parents know that these are the ways that you might be hearing from us in the event that this happens. Because that's not something we would put in policy. That's something that has to be a little bit more within the scope of the building, according to the age group, according to, the situation that the building principal needs to determine that communication. But you need to tell parents how the communication is coming, so.
Understand. So, I mean, I would just say, I mean, that right now, we could do that on multiple fronts. I think each of the building principals could definitely include that in their weekly communications. I can let people know that those communications are coming, and yes, it would be kind of different. And then I feel like moving forward, that will be a part of our beginning of the year communications with, and it's something that we could also look to see how it can be articulated in the handbooks.
Yep.
Which can also be helpful. Yeah.
Which we kind of assumed, but we have to ask the
But-
question,
yep.
so.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? So before we move on, just to clarify, this policy is up on the webpage for public comment through December 22nd. And then policy subcommittee will be meeting on, let me get the correct date, Because we need to have it ready for the following meeting, the policy subcommittee is going to meet on Tuesday, January 4th, I believe. And we will go over any public comments that we have at that time, and then we will bring it to the full committee for vote on, at our meeting on, sorry, let me make sure I get the right date. On the 18th, we will vote on this policy. Okay? Not the 10th.
Does our agenda say the 10th?
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it does.
Second
Let me-
readings and
Oh,
votes
sorry.
for January.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong calendar. That'll teach me. We will be voting on this on January 10th. Policy Subcommittee will review it on the 4th. Full committee will vote on it on the 10th. Okay. So, and the second one, first of all, motion to waive the reading of P6110, graduation requirements.
Second.
So Alicia motioned, Catherine was the second. And I have a question, which is, don't we usually do the second reading on the third meeting, or no?
No, I think the second reading is the second meeting, and then the vote is on the 3rd.
I don't have a big issue either way. It just occurred to me, I was expecting it, I was expecting reading, discuss, reading, but I don't think it,
Yeah, second reading is actually third.
Oh.
We're talking about it, so I don't know. I-
Okay.
We may just be taking an extra step with waiving the readings, we're not doing, but.
Okay.
But the second reading actually happens at the third meeting, which is
Okay.
weird.
Well, I would rather do more than we had to and not do the right thing, so.
and we already have a second, so
We already motioned
I'm
second.
gonna call for a vote. All in favor?
Unless you'd like to hear my
Extra
Boston
waving.
accent read that, yeah. So a little bit of background on this is that this was brought to us by the administration. It's a change to our current policy for course selection, course graduation requirements and course selection at WA, which previously the old policy had required a standalone computer technology class. The thought was that there is so much computer technology being utilized in other places, and there are so few students who are taking a standalone computer technology class to fulfill that requirement, that removing that requirement frees up a little bit more student voice and choice, frees up some space. The electives would then move to 22.5, and the overall total would stay the same, but it would allow for more freedom within the selection. We have had one public comment on this, and the concern is that it is such an important topic and so woven into the fabric of so much of what students do postgraduate now, that so far that has been, of the few comments that we've seen, that concern. Personally, from what I have heard, I think it's tempting to think of this as saying, well, you're using Google Classroom, you're getting computer technology. And that's not what the administration brought to us when they brought the policy to us. When you're in a lot of these classes, things like the computer music classes and some of the drafting classes, there's far more use of technology than I think most people understand. It's not you're just accessing Google Classroom, you are programming things, you are using equipment, you are creating things in the spirit of the computer technology classes. So it's not just wiping one out just because you're using a Chromebook. So like I said, we've had a couple of comments. We had one email and then we had one public comment. And then I will open the floor for any other questions on this policy. Clara?
I would just add on to what Alicia said. You know, I think some of the tenor of the comments we have heard is that, well, isn't it important that every student, you know, learn something like computer programming?
Mm-hmm.
This requirement never required that.
Right.
This requirement was not a requirement that everyone take computer programming language. This was just that you take a computer technology class. And what the administration has done is looked at and said, there is so much technology embedded throughout the curriculum in a variety of ways that if a student wants to take a computer programming class, they're going to do that as one of their electives regardless if this requirement is there. And if a student does not have an interest in taking a computer programming class, they're they're fulfilling it, it's almost kind of duplicative of what they're doing elsewhere in the curriculum. So we're not taking away any options in terms of computer programming access for the students who want that, and that is important for them. That option is still available, but this just gives greater options and flexibility for all students to kind of carve their own path through the academy and build their own schedule of classes that are of most interest to them. And that's consistently been feedback from students that is what helps them be engaged in their education. So, so this is not trying to diminish the role and the importance of technology. It's just giving students choice and flexibility.
Thanks. Valerie?
And just for those of us maybe with younger students or someone watching at home, the reason this doesn't apply to the current seniors is because the schedules are already set. I had someone ask me that, so I just wanted to.
Sorry, Hannah. Did you, I mean, not to put you on the spot, I mean, did you have any comments on this? And I was kind of curious, what class fulfilled the computer technology requirement for you?
I took Microsoft Certified.
Oh, you did?
Because I needed a business class as well for DECA. So it kind of checked off both of those boxes for me. I mean, the class was fine. It was good. I got certified, so that was nice. I personally never had any interest in image editing or computer programming. But I know there are a lot of students who do like those classes a lot. So I'm fully supportive of this because, again, there's still the opportunity to take the class. We just don't have to, which is good because if I didn't have to take it, I probably would have had 7 full year classes this year. But of course, I am 1 year too early.
And so I think what Hannah just said illustrates what the administration was saying, was that there's a lot of other but still computer technology classes happening. And to clarify what Valerie said, so this policy will go into effect for the 2022-2023 school year. Unfortunately, that also means if you're a junior and you've already fulfilled it, or a sophomore, you've already fulfilled it. So yay, good for you. But anyone else registering going forward would not have to fulfill it.
Yeah, and I think the clarification on that is that sometimes we've made adjustments to the graduation requirements and we've said they only apply to the incoming freshmen, but that has been in situations where we've been adding a requirement.
Exactly.
In this situation, we're taking away a requirement, so it seems reasonable to take that requirement away from.
Provide that flexibility.
Yeah, the current students as well.
Key distinction.
Sorry,
Yeah.
seniors.
Yeah.
But that's the difference. If we were ever in a situation where we were adding a requirement, I think it's much more likely that it would be freshmen and up.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Policy Subcommittee.
So
Good job.
this policy is also up for public comment on our webpage through December 22nd. If you're looking for something to do, we have 2 policies you can comment on. And again, the policy subcommittee will meet on January 4th, and the full committee will vote on both policies on January 10th. Got it right that time.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Next agenda item is full day kindergarten discussion, continued discussion. I turn to you two. I don't know if you want to lead things off.
We didn't have any more questions.
I know.
So at our last meeting, December 6th, we shared with you the rationale for moving forward with full day kindergarten in the first place, which very much still applies, along with why this feels like a good time to be able to take advantage of these one-time funds to help us strategize on how to build a sustainable tuition-free full day K program. And then we shared with you the details about one strategy in order to fund it, and then wean off of these one-time funds over the course of 6 or so years so that we can build it into our operating budget so that it is sustainable.
And one of the reasons why we're also doing this at this time is because this has been a priority that has been identified for the committee. And so to have the discussion outside of the budget conversation, I think is an important thing. We will be presenting the FY '23 budget on January 10th. In our proposal with full day K, it has no impact on FY '23, on the FY '23 budget. However, we are going to be having discussions about the FY '23 budget. So I feel like that's also, there are people who are naturally are asking questions about it, which I think makes a lot of sense. I just feel like one of the things that I watched in previous years was just the confusion around things that were important priorities, such as the school start times and around the busing scenario that became so entwined with the budget discussion that I felt like it kind of changed the way in which we were talking about it. So I would encourage you to talk about this proposal and consider your feelings as a committee on the priority of it, knowing that any action that you make on it, you still have all of the discussions about future budgets, right? So even if you were to make a decision and vote on this tonight, and then find that while we're having discussions in the FY '23 budget, you have questions and you want to direct us in another way, you're able to do that. So you have that ability to continue to vote those things in too. So I just, from my perspective, I think it's an important discussion for you to have and for you to be able to talk about with concerns or questions that you have now as well too, and not have that conversation during the budget season.
And I appreciate that decoupling the conversation about our priorities with regard to full-day kindergarten separate from the budget. You know, talk about how we value this. I mean, there does come a time, as you've alluded to, that we will have to make a decision on whether this, you know, that we're offering tuition-free full-day kindergarten for everybody for the 22-23 school year. So that decision will have to come. And while the current proposal uses ESSER funds such that there will be no budgetary impact for FY '23, we are, by doing that, by adopting that approach, we would be incurring, you know, a commitment to folding this in the budget in future years. So we do have to factor that in as a committee. But just to be clear, the discussion tonight, I think it will kind of go where it goes. And I think if there's a motion and a vote, there's a range of things that could look like. It could, you know, it could be very specific about the proposal we saw, or it could be something that has a slightly different take on our support of that. And I think I'm just kind of curious to see what people think. But I guess one question that I know has come up, actually two questions I'll throw out there. One is, given that we will be having budget discussions very soon, and given that, you know, we know that this will have a budget impact down the line. I lost my train of thought. Are there other, I guess I'll just stick with one question. What's the timing of, what do we feel the timing is on notifying parents about tuition-free full-day kindergarten for the 22-23 school year? When do we want to make sure that that is clear, that we've decided, that we've committed to that tuition-free full-day kindergarten?
Well, I think we'd need to consider not only our own internal timeline as to when we begin that process, because we have control over that, right? But can try to consider also when families begin to make plans. So it would be, those are the two things that I think we would be considering. Would you have a better idea as to the timeline? That would not be something I'd be familiar with.
Right, so I think if we're looking at the February timeframe, that would give parents adequate time to adjust one way or another. The lottery we have had in March. At one point, it was as early as March. I'm not sure what the month was this past year, but I think if we were to shoot for the first or second meeting in February, that would probably be the latest.
And can I clarify that when we're talking about the full day tuition free, it means there will be no half-day kindergarten then. It will be full-day, tuition-free for all students from August 22.
I am very much in support of tuition-free, full-day K in Westford. I think we've identified the situation that we are in as one that is inequitable to members of our community. It has been a huge source of frustration for parents and for administrators, and we've gotten wedged into a system where we have become dependent on this full-day K tuition, and that to try to accommodate the changing needs and desires of the community, we've been adding these full-day K sections as we go, and that has further just exacerbated the problem by creating more dependence on this full-day K tuition, and it has exacerbated the inequity of the situation. So this is an opportunity, and the words of Principal Lacoste are kind of ringing in my head that if not now, when? It does give me pause when I hear some of the concerns about the FY23 and future budgets. This committee is certainly no stranger to difficult budget years. So it does give me pause, but this is such an important priority to make this shift for our community that I think we need to do it, but I think we also need to be mindful of what the short and long-term impacts of it could be. And I think we need to very carefully communicate where we are to the community, because I would be concerned about us taking a vote tonight that says, yes, full-day K, and for the public to see that and say, that means full-day K, free full-day K forever, and that there is no further discussions, when maybe there are some continued discussions that have to happen before that gets finalized for the 22-23 year. I don't want to box the committee in. I don't want to box you as the administration and finance in as you're crafting the FY23 budget by causing confusion that could lead to further confusion or frustration for the public down the road. So I think we just need to be careful about what vote we take here tonight, that it's clear to the community what's happening and where we are in the process. But I think we absolutely should be supportive of the plan that you brought to us in support of free, tuition-free, full-day K for all.
Just to kind of reiterate what Gloria said, professionally as a teacher, I absolutely 100% agree that we should have full-day kindergarten for our kiddos. It's the right thing to do. And I think one of the things that kind of dawned on me as I was thinking about this today, because I know I've had conversations with families who really did like the idea of the half-day kindergarten and what it gave to them. But I also really appreciated when we had the group of kindergarten supporters here last meeting, and how, one of the teachers had mentioned how, they were seeing maybe a bit more intervention being needed in first and second grade for those half-day kiddos. And, I think having lost that, the pre-first grade option, probably gave us a good bit of a buffer for a number of years for maybe some of those students that came in and just did the half-day kindergarten. Whereas now we're looking at, having kindergartners, and bear in mind, I suppose, the majority of them have been in preschool and have done a year, if not two, of, being in a learning environment. And so I think having full-day kindergarten sets them up in a really strong way for first and second grade. I also come at this from a teacher's point of view. The pressure I can imagine for those half-day kindergarten teachers feeling like you have to get through an entire curriculum, create lots of moments of social connections, and just have time to build those relationships. Just knowing how long it takes to get kindergartners packed and ready for the bus alone. So, you know, I fully support what we're hopefully going to do tonight, because I think this is something that will impact every student in Westford going forward, and really puts a strong foundation into that K-2 years that hopefully we actually see come back, you know, down the road in maybe less intervention, you know, stronger relationships, more resilience, who knows. And I mean, personally speaking, as a mom who had twin girls go through half-day kindergarten, it was not fantastic in our house for many reasons. So I also know this from a personal level, how much it would mean, I think, for families to have that option. Saying that, it still didn't, you know, doesn't sit well knowing that we have to vote on something that we don't necessarily know where the money is going to come from in FY24. My husband has me well trained when it comes to budgeting, but you know, I've had conversations with many people in the community and the committee and in administration. I've done lots of reading and research, so I'm not taking this vote lightly, but I think this is bigger than a budget. I think this is a value. It's something that we can actually do for our kids that I think, especially after the last 3 years, has been quite tough. And so, yeah, I think this is the right thing we should all be doing to get behind and try and help out where we can.
I want to echo a lot of the things Catherine said. I wholeheartedly, you know, philosophically support the full-day kindergarten for all of our students. And I guess I wanted to reflect on the process that we're taking. I think that it's easy to maybe be a casual observer of our meetings and wonder what we're doing, you know, encumbering future committees to spend money when people have been watching us talk about tough budget years in the past. But this, to our conversation earlier about the FY23 budget and the kind of direction that we hope to be going in as a district and as an administration and as a committee, these are the proactive, strategic decisions that honestly people have been clamoring for, right? Every budget season it seems like there's a criticism that things are too reactive, not proactive enough. This is literally as proactive as it gets, right? There aren't a lot of conversations town-wide about what budgets look like a couple years out, and this is the responsible way to fund a new initiative. We don't take this lightly. We're looking at this within our own appropriation from the town. The only other way to do this is an override, and we're not suggesting that. We're saying that this is a value, sorry, speaking for others, I'm saying that this is a value that we do commit to future budgets to make those hard decisions. And we, again, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but we don't take that lightly, right? And I think that I just want to make sure that that is well stated in this, in whatever vote we end up taking tonight, because like I said, I think it's easy to look at it and think like that we just will assume the money will appear and that, you know, there won't be hard decisions. And I think all of us really do grasp that there will be trade-offs to make, there will be hard decisions to make, and it's about what we see the district becoming, what we want Westford to be. And I think this is part of it, and I just think that this is the way, this is the only way to Mr. Lacosse's point, the way to fund a new program and a new initiative is by weaning it off and using these one-time use funds or an override, and we are not suggesting that. We are suggesting doing this in this strategic, methodical, responsible way that is a little scary to think about, but it's the way we're talking about what we want Westford to be, and I support that.
I'm going to quote Tracy Novick, because we all love Tracy Novick. Budgets are moral documents, and you fund what you value. And if we value equity, we fund equitable programs. This is the baseline for equity in this district. And yes, you are right, it is scary. Every budget season is scary. You fund what you value, and if we're going to say that we're an equitable district, we walk the walk. Equity for everyone. I am 100% in support of this.
Yeah, I think I have said many times, it's like the half-day kindergarten is a pain for no, for people. Like they have to have two salaries to be able to live in Westford, because Westford is not a cheap place to be able to survive. A lot of, like, for example, especially like first generation immigrants, both of parents, they have to work to be able to actually live in Westford. So to be able to actually have the food aid pay option, and then now universal food aid option available to them. So now they don't have to actually juggle about like getting into a lottery, all those anxieties, all those stuff. Well, I'm not going to actually put my kids if they get into a half day. So so this is actually the strategic decision we're going to make, right, to help people out. But on the other hand, obviously there are budget impacts. I don't know, like, if there are things being allowed or not, right? Think about, like, people have to pay $4,000, and then I don't know if, like, for example, for families, they're able to actually set up some voluntary donations, which can actually cover some budget losses or whatever. But that's a different story. But the full day for parents not to be able to not to actually get anxiety about where their kids have to go if they don't get a full day. That's great, right?
Going last is always the most difficult, because I think there were so many great points that were already made to this. I think it's just good to point out, like, this conversation's not happening in a vacuum, right? Like, this is a discussion that's happening nationally, particularly with childcare costs, things like that. And this is something that we can implement, something tangible that we can put in place that will alleviate a problem that our community members are having now, right? And I think it's brilliant. I think there's been a lot of thought that has gone into how to make this sustainable, and it is daunting, and these decisions are always daunting in the beginning, but I think that we've put a lot of thought into how it will look a few years from now, and we'll make it happen, hopefully. So I'm completely for it, and kudos to the administration for putting together a coherent plan.
So I think what you hear is the unanimous support of the school committee. But I also want to look to you and say, what, if we were to take a vote, what's a useful vote to hear from this committee? What helps you prioritize this, but also factor in the realities of this year's budget, if that factors in? Again, we understand the ESSER funds, can be used for that year, but we don't want to hamstring you in any way, in the next couple months, but we also want to make sure that this voice of support that you have collectively from this group is heard, and you feel that support for the proposal.
Well, I do think that what we've done is made a proposal for a long-range plan, right, in order to implement, to bring tuition-free full-day kindergarten. And so if you were to vote your support of that proposal, or that support of that idea, then it gives us a directive as we even prepare our January 10th information for you, that we move forward knowing that that's the future. And then we're looking at the FY23 budget with a clear mind that we have certain targets for the future that we've already laid out, because I think, to Valerie's point, our goal is to be proactive and to schedule out, I think, responsible ways to impact change in the district. If as in any year, if we present information to you on January 10th that you then have questions or concerns about, or challenge us to rethink things or to do other things, then I feel like that will be our ongoing discussion for, you know, a couple of meetings, right? To then be talking about those things. And if at some point then, based on the information we share with you, you say, okay, we actually want you to consider X and using ESSER 3 funds, you know, we'll have concerns about it because we're using then one-time funds again to overcome a shortfall as opposed to use them proactively in a different way. So I feel like our challenge is to look at our FY23 budget, to be responsible to look at that and have a specific plan for you in terms of the FY23 budget, which should be, like I said earlier, I think a separate conversation than the full day K piece. My philosophy and thoughts and Pat's practice, I think, has been such that our goal is to try to address this shortfall that I'm showing you impacted FY22 and to have a plan that shows how we do that. And it might be a plan that looks similar to the FDK plan that shows how something could be done over a couple of years. And it might be things that we look at separately. But I do feel like if you were to decide and vote your support, that gives us a very clear guideline. It does tell the community that we're moving forward with that discussion, knowing that what Carrie said is that if we did decide to make any change for the fall of 22, we'll communicate that clearly to families what that means. But as far as the discussion as to whether or not we are going to, whether it's going to be, you know, full day K, or whether there would still be included, you know, a half day included, I think we would put those conversations to rest and we'd move forward with just looking at the finances. Is that?
Yeah, so the motion then would be something along the lines of to continue pursuing the plan that has been proposed versus the vote being, yes, we are implementing tuition-free full-day K. Would that be a subsequent vote, say, first meeting in February after we've had time to digest the budget, even though we're decoupling them? I think that I sense some hesitancy on making an official vote and committing to it tonight.
Maybe.
I think we should commit to
So
it tonight.
if
I
I
think
can
we
share,
should,
I actually don't have a concern about that,
Yeah.
in full honesty, because I mean, the way that I view it, I mean, short of us committing to breaking ground on a building or something like, I mean, if there was a new committee tomorrow, right, they could always instruct the administration as to what their wills and desires of the committee was. I mean, I view this as the same way. If there is some sudden change in will in a few months, I mean, we can address it then. But I think right now our decision is, yes, we're good for 22, or at least my mind, good for 22, and make it happen.
Yep.
Like that's how I'm viewing voting on this. But
I think it's
Yeah.
accept the proposal and direct you to continue, I think it's accept the proposal and direct you to continue pursuing avenues of funding for subsequent years.
Yeah.
Want me to take a whack at it?
That's about what I was gonna have.
I had one too, but
Okay, go ahead, no.
apparently we're both drafting across the table.
You policy people.
Yeah, mine was.
Possible.
It's what we do.
Mine was support the proposal and direct
Mhm.
to continue pursuing, exactly what we said, pursuing that's the part I didn't have the predicate of the sentence, or the object of the sentence.
Okay, so then I will make a motion to accept the proposal put forward by the administration for full-day K tuition-free for the Westford Public Schools, and direct the administration to continue pursuing funding options for subsequent years.
second,
Any other questions or discussion on that motion?
But the question is that even in the proposal, you already actually, obviously, it doesn't have to have all the detail, lay out a roadmap about how this could be funded.
Yes, it does, but by putting it in the motion, it's clear to the public that we're not just saying, do it, it's done, discussion over. It says to the public, we're continuing having the discussion about the funding for the subsequent years.
And that will happen every year in the budget anyway, right?
Yeah.
Does that go far enough though, Alicia? In, you know, like if we're going to commit to full day kindergarten, let's commit to full day kindergarten rather than leave a question mark over every subsequent year. That it's just we as a district are making that commitment moving forward, that's it, that it doesn't, because the last thing you want to do is to create, you know, uncertainty for families longer term. I mean, if Dr. Chu and Dr. Cleary and Pat are willing to take this, I think we should commit to it rather than having more discussions every year, potentially.
Does anyone want to amend how we worded it? Or do you want to leave it as is?
My concern is clarity for the public. And I think we either need to go the route of what Catherine is suggesting, and we are all in, and this is happening starting next fall, or we are providing direction to the administration to craft the FY23 budget accordingly, consider the impact on future fiscal years, and that we will be making a final determination on the start of full day K tuition free for all for the FY22-23 school year in early to mid-February. And the only reason for that is, I think, allowing clarity for the public that, yes, we are committed to full free day K for all, but it is also the responsibility of the committee to see how all of these pieces come together over the course of the next month. I guess that just speaks to what I was saying earlier, that I want to give you clear direction, but I also do not want to box you in.
The question,
when
though,
that
about
process hasn't fully evolved.
the question on clarity, though, I think when we talk about budget, isn't for the FY23, though. It's for FY24 moving forward, which we're not going to get in the next couple of weeks, or a month or two discussion. We have a pretty solid idea of where we're going for FY23, you know, just based on your presentation and the numbers you've looked at. So, you know, that's why I wonder, do we need much more discussion on it when we're also clearly saying that we value this, that this is maybe bigger than just a budget line item, and that, you know, let's do that for families. There's enough uncertainty when it comes to figuring out, you know, parents and child minding, and also just for schools and districts to prepare, you know, but that's just my thoughts on it.
To address this, certainly, I think we're early enough in the budget process for FY23, and that there is an identified gap so far, that I don't know that we have clarity, and I don't know that, you know, that it wouldn't necessarily hamstring our efforts to develop that budget by locking us in at this point before that process is complete. I think that's what you're speaking to.
We've been through a few more budget cycles.
Yeah.
And I think this is a committed approach, but a conservative approach. And I think that that's a responsible path to take. I don't want to be making a commitment tonight that a month or two from now, we decide we can't keep. I don't make promises I can't keep. I once promised a 4-year-old that they could see a panda, and that panda,
Yeah, they're elusive.
that panda
They're elusive.
was going back to China, and I looked at my husband and I said, "We are taking an 8-hour drive to see a bear," because I had made a promise. So I don't want to make a promise for the fall until we have all of the components. And then
We're
I'm
having
happy to
commit
make that promise.
FY24 and FY25, that's my whole point. If we're waiting to see the FY23 budget, it's only giving us clarity for 1 year. And
Thank you, Hannah.
And forgive me, obviously this is my first budget, you know, cycle. I get that. I just kind of, you know, think with the way, knowing how you presented that it was FY24 moving forward, and plus, you know, our last discussion, I said, were there other things you felt that the SR3 funds could cover, and there wasn't nothing kind of tangible that you saw. You know, we've reached out to community members. They were looking for something that would have a good impact in the social, emotional well-being of kids. So, I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, and it's just, you know, for clarity for families, I think, you know, this is more than just FY23 budget.
If I could
Yeah.
respond to your point, because I hear it
Yeah.
well, with a question, again, to the two of you and to Pat, is there a scenario in the FY23 budget process where we look and say those ESSER funds, you know, the decisions are such that we would look to those funds for something else just to meet our FY23 budget needs? I mean, that's the case we're talking about, really. That's the case we're talking about.
I think, Chris, you put it perfectly, because like originally I saw like FY23 what it was set for the key. Now looks like maybe like Dr. Chu or Carrie or Pat want to preserve some option based on like how the budget is going on. Is that my understanding?
And I will say, I mean, I do think that that's a legitimate question that somebody can ask, right? My concern is that only takes this scenario and kicks it down the road for one more year.
I was just gonna say,
That's all that does. And so
that's
that is
literally
not what
what
we
we're
want
trying
to
to
do, which
solve
is,
from
I think-
last year.
Yeah, that's right.
So, sorry, that's the exact point I was gonna make, was that the conversation we're having about the FY22 decisions and using ESSER 3 funds to fill that hole would just perpetuate that again, which is what we're strategically saying we want to get away from, so.
Well, the alternative question could be too, are there decisions that we have to make in this year's, in the FY23 budget that are so difficult that we would be so concerned about an FY24 or 25 budget that we would reconsider the timing of this? And that, again, I think that's what we're hedging. I think that's what Gloria and I are hedging, is by carving it in stone right now, are we forcing either a retraction of some sort down the road, or decisions that are so painful that we would look back and say, we wish we had left a little room there to have more information and more time?
If I can throw out an analogy, just to be clear about what I'm suggesting, because I don't in any way want to suggest that this is somehow hedging our commitment to full day K, because that is not my intent. My suggestion is that we get engaged to full day K and set our wedding date for early February, instead of running to the Justice of Peace today and getting married today. I'm suggesting that we get engaged to full day K and we set the wedding for February. That's my proposal.
You can have an
Worst
engagement
case-
party?
Well, I guess, you know.
Or is that a?
No, because
do we
worst
need
case,
to vote tonight, though?
worst case
Because-
scenario, breaking an engagement off is harder than ending a marriage.
So,
Worst case scenario. It's not, and I agree, it's not hedging our commitment, it's hedging the things we don't know about how we get there.
can I ask one other question?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I guess this all feels like, is ESSER 3 the release valve for FY23? Like, wouldn't perhaps our high balance and school choice, right? Like, don't we have other choices? It sounds like we're making ESSER 3 this, like, the only trap door for FY23. Did I say ESSER 23? ESSER 3 for FY23. Thank you. Which I guess and granted, you guys are in it more than we are at this point, obviously, but that doesn't feel like that would be the case, based on last year's discussions and what limited experience I have with budget cycles. But because that feels like the underlying thing that we're saying, right? Is that, like, maybe we need to pull that ripcord of ESSER 3 funds, but is that really true?
I think it's that compounded with, even if that weren't the case, the knowledge of the impact of FDK on FY24, FY25 budgets. If there are things that are so difficult in this budget cycle. And again, we don't know, we're still early.
Sure.
But if there were, how would we feel then on compounding it with what we know as what we'd be signing up for in subsequent years? So I think it's a little bit of both.
Does anyone want to tweak the wording? I threw the wording out there, so
I don't
we can
even
have a
remember the
discussion
wording.
of wording.
Yeah, there is a motion and a second on the floor.
For the wedding.
Honestly, I did that on purpose because we need to discuss what it is that, so, does anyone want to tweak the
Help me,
wording?
Alicia. Maybe I should write this
Oh,
down.
good
So
Lord.
what the
I
so
don't
it
know.
was
What
it was
did
a
I
motion
actually
to
say?
accept the
you.
proposal as presented, and for the administration to what? To continue to
To
explore.
pursue
Funding for
funding
subsequent.
sources for subsequent years.
Yeah, I mean.
Yes, thank you, because I wasn't sure exactly what
Yeah,
the
so
first
I
part
guess the question mark is that not focused enough to what we're looking for? And I think at least Chris and Gloria have made the case for that. You know, it leaves a little room open in case there's some last minute concerns in February. And I'm okay with that as long as we as a committee are all on the same page that, like, we've kind of all agreed this is a priority and we should really try to keep it a priority no matter what. Very close to no matter what. Right.
Thank you for having that, because I could not remember the first, like, 6 words, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if I suggest a tweak to that, I guess I would tweak it in 2 ways. I would strengthen, instead of just support for administrative plan, I'd say that we support administrative plans and are fully committed to free full-day K for all in Westford. And I think the second part of yours, that we direct the administration to develop the FY23 budget accordingly and consider funding sources for subsequent fiscal years, and that we will target a final decision for the 22-23 school year in early to mid-February, that would then be communicated to all, entering kindergarten parents.
You two are typing furiously, did you get that?
Ish.
Does that result in
don't
us
think I
needing to
did.
vote on it then for subsequent years?
No.
Okay.
But we would
No,
revote
I
in
would,
February?
I would very much presume that the vote in February, if not, like, we're gonna consider whether full-day K happens every single year. No. That we would be deciding in February that, yes, full-day K, free full-day K for all starts in fall of '22 and in
Based on
perpetuity.
the budget, okay.
That we're ready to make that commitment, because we can see how all the pieces fit together.
Mhm.
That's the marriage.
Mhm.
And you're not just married for 1 year. We're married in perpetuity.
So how does everyone feel about Gloria's version?
So basically, it will delay this vote to February? Is
I was
that-
about to
No,
say,
we're
yeah.
taking this vote tonight. We're taking the vote to voice our full commitment for full-day K.
And then
And,
what's the vote
but
in
we're
February?
being clear to parents that we need to see how all of the pieces are gonna fit together before we start taking kindergarten registrations for the fall. And I just think that's a responsible thing to do.
So what's the vote in February?
It would be to implement full-day kindergarten for all, tuition-free in the 22-23 school year.
So the February vote is the official endorsement. This vote is support the spirit. Is that right?
And the plan moving
And it's,
forward.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
direction to the administration to start working on exactly how this is gonna happen and bring it back with, signed, sealed, approved.
Okay. So you gave us a little bit room in January going through all those numbers, and then in February we'll have a little bit more confidence financially.
And it's nuanced, and
Yes.
nuance is hard, and I have no doubt that it will cause consternation because people will be trying to figure out exactly what's happening. But I think it captures, as you said, the spirit and the philosophical commitment, and it is a commitment, but it also lets us be engaged for a little while.
So then my question is, Nina, do I need to withdraw the original motion, or can I accept an amended motion from Gloria? Or can we accept an amended motion from Gloria? Okay. So, we would move Gloria's wording the friendly amendment of Gloria's wording to the motion. And that,
Seconded.
there you go.
Motion is amended.
Yes, as amended by Gloria Miller.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Just to clarify.
Yes,
for-
please.
I didn't wanna say
If you don't have it, then I can help you.
That latter part talks about coming up with plans for subsequent years' funding. So when we come back to February, though, I just want to be clear that we will not have the plan
Yep.
for FY '24 or '25 or '26,
Correct.
what that funding would entail.
Right.
So it seems like, even if your wording sticks, I just want to kind of summarize, it seems as though you are certainly endorsing the path that we're on tonight and charging us in advance of July 10th, when we're presenting the budget, to continue decoupling them because of your commitment to full-day kindergarten. So continue on using ESSER 3 in that regard, and it would provide an opportunity for a detour if the committee felt that was necessary prior to that February vote.
Right.
Okay.
And I think her wording was consider funding in subsequent years. So to me, that means we're keeping it in mind.
Okay.
We're not describing what it will necessarily look like, but we're thinking about it at least.
Yeah, I think it's more in terms of considering the impacts. I mean,
Yeah.
you,
Right.
when you're designing FY '23, you're always being mindful of, well, what is this going to look like down the road?
Sure.
So I think that's all it is it so that we can have that discussion and consider, this is what it looks like for FY '23, and this is what, we're making a long-term commitment, so we need to consider the long-term impacts.
If somebody's just listening to this conversation, they wouldn't know that the original proposal does have 7 years' worth of what this could look like. There's just, there's a small percentage that is unknown. But a lot of it is known, so it's not like, if
Right,
somebody's
right.
listening thinking, oh, they don't know how they're gonna do it for the next, that's not the point.
And
Right.
actually, procedurally, I wonder if we could retroactively add the presentation to this meeting packet as well.
Oh, yeah.
Good idea.
Would be great.
Yeah.
And I know
Did
you
get that?
mentioned.
Can we do that, Nina?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do think it's important, though, through this conversation, to restate the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's crystal clear.
Just to clarify.
I was gonna make my stab at the notes I took. I didn't get every word, but I was taking my stab.
All right, might be able to fill you in.
But you mentioned early February. We have scheduled meetings on January 31st, and presumably February 14th as well. Do we want to say by, no later than February 14th for that vote? Is that still comfortable to you?
So Gloria, can you restate what you had?
Do you want me to, or do you want Chris?
I was gonna make a
Do you think
stab,
you
which
have it?
is-
Either way.
That would be a motion to support the full-day kindergarten proposal as presented, and to assert the committee's full commitment to full-day kindergarten for all in Westford, and to direct the administration to develop the FY '23 budget accordingly, and to consider funding in subsequent years, with a target for a final decision on full-day kindergarten for the 22-23 school year, no later than February 14th of 2022.
Second? Did I already second it? Do we second it again?
Second it again,
Okay.
because it's been read in.
Yep.
Okay.
Any final thoughts? Are we comfortable?
The only thing is that Dr. Chu and Carrie, are you guys comfortable with the February 14th date?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
How are you gonna whittle that down to the principal newsletters?
That was the longest one.
We just scheduled the wedding for February 14th, guys.
Mazel tov
Come
on
on.
the engagement.
Valentine's Day. A Valentine's Day wedding.
Wow, that metaphor just keeps going.
That's definitely gonna get misunderstood somewhere.
Well, now you say that.
Just saying.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good discussion. I think we're obviously in agreement, and I know it's still tricky and it's still nuanced, but I think it's probably good that we sit with that nuance.
So do we release the balloons or do we hold them?
I don't know. I think we let
My
the
interpretation
headline
is-
writers decide that, right? Like, is the headline full day kindergarten for all, or?
Oh, no balloons.
The ghostwriter will tell us.
Okay, sure. Sure.
The ghostwriter will tell us.
The ghostwriter will tell us. Right. Okay, we're gonna move on to a COVID update. As we wait
While
for
we
Dr.
wait.
Chu to return.
Like a very lukewarm milestone.
How are we doing on time? Not too
Not
bad.
bad.
Not too bad.
Not bad.
Not too bad.
Would you love to discuss words?
Could you repeat that motion now? Can you
Nope.
remember it?
Some improvisation going on.
Carrie, I was holding my breath when you said, just to clarify.
I almost didn't say it.
No, I.
No, we had to.
We can get-
It's fine.
Absolutely necessary, absolutely.
COVID update.
Yay.
There we go.
So, one of the things that I thought it would be nice to highlight though right away is that our current, because we started counting the numbers per month, right? So if you remember our first couple months, we had 63 positive cases a month, and then it went up to 78 in November, and right now we are at, I believe the number was 68 positive cases in December with a couple of days left. So it's similar to November-ish a little bit. You can see from the data that the town numbers are still, active cases in town are still going up. But I feel like we're going back, the numbers this last week went down again. I did get an update from our district coordinator last week at, I want to say it was either Wednesday or Thursday at that point. They had already done 614 total test and stay tests, counting all of those up, and only 4 positive results at that moment in time.
Since
It's
the
the
program
number's
started.
higher now because this number is including the rest of the week. So when she had told me it was in the middle of the week and I didn't add these numbers up. But there haven't been more. So I thought that again is just that's very promising. There is a discrepancy in the number of test and stay, and that happens because of the way in which the group of students who are electing to participate in test and stay, because not everybody chooses to do it, right? Some people don't choose to participate. But then it also changes over the course of a week, depending on when they were identified. So like they could be counted in both of the weeks, and then some people might only be counted in 1 week if you're following that, because it's 5 days, but
Yep.
they could have started in the week before. That's why, because when I looked at the numbers were just so much higher this week for test and stay. And I think that that's also contributing to that, because some of this week's numbers are actually the students who started last week. Well, last week, I'm saying it as if it's this week, but it's last week's numbers and the week before that.
Right.
If you're following me, I'm forgetting that it's Monday of a new week. I'm anticipating more information from the commissioner in January. We did have a Zoom call where he basically said they weren't going to be giving us any information right now, and that we'd be talking again in January. I think when there's more information after the holidays as to whether the January 15th date that he was originally talking about is going to still be in effect, or whether they're going to talk about an extension, or whether they're going to give us more options at that moment in time. That I think we're still waiting for. Catherine, you had asked me a question
Yes.
about the difference in, like, why we might have more close contacts one week for the other. Is that was that the part of it?
Yeah, because, some, like, comparatively
Yeah.
speaking towards the number of positive cases, like the biggest obvious week being that in, when was it, November?
Yeah.
We had 19 cases, positive cases, and 148 close contacts. Then, the 13th to the 17th, we had 20 positive cases and 49 close contacts. So, you know, there's a few of them in there, and you know yourselves, there's a rhythm, there's a pattern to how school goes. So I'm just kind of curious as to how maybe we're creating maybe situations where we're getting more close contacts.
In many cases, though, it still speaks to truly who the positive case is. Correct, right? So one of the scenarios that we had early on is that we knew that, for example, if an adult was the positive case and that adult had actually been doing small groups, right, might have then actually had a larger impact on a group, or if it was a person who had seen multiple groups of students through the day at an elementary school versus another adult who wouldn't see multiple groups, that also could have a factor into it. I think it does also depend on where those positive, we've known like earlier on, the positive cases at the beginning of this tended to be at the academy or with the older kids, and we had fewer close contacts in general. Then our younger students started becoming positive, and then when they weren't vaccinated, that also played into it. So I feel like those variables are more indicative of it than if there's something specific that was going on structurally in the classrooms,
I
per
think
se.
it's more, are we monitoring those to inform our practice? You know, our current practices. I mean, because I know obviously the vaccine is now available for 5 to 11-year-olds, and they're getting it, although, you know, not everyone's probably fully past it yet. I know there's been maybe shortages in some of the vaccine clinics recently this week. So it's more, are we monitoring that and, you know, adjusting our classroom strategies or practices for the time being, just to limit close contacts. I'm also just curious as how many, you know, kind of confirmed in-school transmission cases have we had? And the reason I ask this is, you know, potentially come January, we may have to make decisions as a committee, and I think it's just really important to know, are our current strategies working in terms of trying to mitigate and reduce you know, transmission, because, you know, even with vaccination, the last thing you want anyone to have is to get it, you know, if at all possible.
So our nurses are still doing a great job monitoring all of that,
Yeah.
right? And I think there are different conversations in the buildings as a specific case presents itself, right? Depending on whether or not there's something, even as they're trying to figure out the close contacts, they're still having a conversation. For that example, I had some questions directly sent to me from the ghostwriter, right? The ghostwriter, you had shared one of the articles, and we started talking about that. I talked with Principal Antonelli about that, and there was other questions that were just even coming up because there was a high rate of absenteeism at the academy. And so students were asking questions about that. So we were looking into that, and the nurses were great about saying that they have had a lot of kids out, and the kids are not testing positive for strep or for COVID. They are getting tested, and they just have the flu, right? And that in itself has an impact. And so they are kind of monitoring all those things, because one of the things we did talk about, I know was mentioned in one of the articles, was whether or not the academy, they've allowed the kids to go to 6 at a table versus the original 4 at a table. And so Principal Antonelli's been talking with the nurses about that and saying, well, should we be going back to the 4? And they're like, well, we are talking about like the flu, but it is kind of your normal flu. So I don't necessarily know if we need to impact the way in which they have that unstructured time yet, but we're ready. So, you know, we're prepared to make different changes like that I think is a relatively easy adjustment when they think that it's warranted. And I think right now, just the COVID data isn't telling us that it's warranted yet.
I think the one thing that we are going to be talking about come January is the Omicron variant. I think it's going to change how we look at this, and I think we have to decide how we're going to approach it, because the numbers are going to go up. Like, and I don't know if you're seeing what's happening in like New York City.
Oh.
You know, I know at my son's college, everyone just tested positive. I mean, we got him out there in the nick of time. All his suite mates tested positive. The fact that he has taken 5 tests and he's been negative on all of them is a miracle. But the case numbers are going to skyrocket in January, especially after
Harvard have said they're going online for
Yeah.
the first 3 weeks back in January.
And I think we know that it seems like it's less severe, it's a less severe illness, but it will force us to weigh that. How do we want, do we go more restrictive, or do we say, well, because it's less severe, we're comfortable where we're at? But it's a different virus once that becomes the prevalent strain. And I think we will have to reevaluate and think about the measures we have in place now. And the state will help us by telling us what we have to do,
Right.
probably. So maybe we don't have to think about it that much, but I think just as a community, as a state, as a country, we have to think about how we treat Omicron. Because it's no longer, I play it safe and I wear a mask and I'm vaccinated, so therefore I'm not going to get it. It's like,
Yeah.
most of us are probably going to get it at some point. I just feel like that's what's going to happen.
I think this question jives with what you guys were just talking about, but, and I know this might be people last year, I remember, always wanted to know what's the trigger point for going remote, or what's the trigger point for this. Are there conversations like that happening at the administration level to think about a couple weeks out? Or I just know I've been asked that question, like whether those conversations are happening, mostly for reluctance. They don't want it to happen. So the question was whether it's being talked about.
So we've been talking, as we've been looking at our cases, and when we had larger groups of students in just one classroom impacted in a different way, we would start communicating with DESE, because they have a group of people that they want us to be communicating with to ask those questions, because they do not want us to not be in school. And so part of their expectation is that we continue to utilize test and stay as a practice to allow students to be in school. And when we look at that and the effectiveness that it has had so far, that's what we're continuing to look at. So we're not talking about, if X number is impacted, would we close an entire school? What we have talked about is, in the event that an entire class has been impacted, what then would that look like as far as options for that class with remote learning? And then it also depends on the availability of the teacher, right? Because if the teacher is ill and not able to teach remotely, then that also has an impact too. So we do have contingencies like that in play, and we did bring it down to the classroom level, and in many cases that can also then be adapted for multiple classrooms, right? Which could be a grade level, which could be, it could be a school, it could be different things like that. So we are aware of that, but we do not have a specific, okay, this is, at this moment in time, we call full remote. One of the things that was said to us was just the idea, because again, the idea of whether or not remote days could be used in lieu of snow days, right? That even though that was really taken off the table this year, we were allowed to do it previously, but it was really something that wasn't supposed to be on the table. It came up in conversation again, and it was actually a clear encouragement to all districts that no, you should really, if you have a snow day, you should use the snow day. And you should even remember that you are actually giving people a bit of a break, which is something that we've talked about anyway. And so then they talked about, if we go beyond 5, are they going to allow us to then recoup time with remote options? And the concern about that statewide is the inequity, right? Like, we could do that here in Westford for the most part structurally, even though it can be a hardship. We've found ways, even through our own hybrid experience, to support our students, but not every district can do that. So I feel like that's a challenge. So
the state doesn't like that because of the inequity brought upon by a education funding system that creates that inequity that is solidified at the state level and at the federal level. So it's like, oh no, that would be inequitable because we don't help you fund your schools,
Right.
you know, appropriately.
That's right.
Spoken like a
You
true politician.
leave it up to the property taxes. Anyway.
Full circle.
Yeah, yeah. To Catherine's original question, or one of them, because there were so many, no, I'm just kidding.
I ask a lot.
And-
I'm
and
Irish.
Forgive me if I forget, because I know it's been a couple meetings since we've really dived in, I feel like. Is it easy to say for every close contact, how many of them tested positive?
No.
Okay, that's what I was trying to remember. Because I think that's what you're asking, like,
Is there-
again, it comes
yeah.
down to, is there in-school transmission?
Is there in-school transmission?
We have.
We track, we know some of that. We've tracked where we know that where we do know that someone who was identified as a close contact, if they have become positive.
Yeah.
Where we have been paying attention for some of that, but the other problem is that we also have people who are exposed by multiple sources.
Sure.
And so that's where we don't have a definitive for everything,
Yeah.
Right.
right?
But I feel like at least we'd know, I mean, if it's 0, then you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, great.
Right.
If it's 10 close contacts and 3 of them tested positive,
Yeah.
right, you don't know that all 3 was in-school
What we
transmission. but you
the best part of that data is going back again to the test and stay, right? Out of the 600 plus tests, the people who have been identified as close contacts, only 4 have ever resulted in a positive case.
But that's 600 tests, not 600
That's right.
people.
That's right. But it's still like, you know, I mean, well, if you divide that, I mean, they've all had to, if they all took the, if they were all 5 days that they take it, you can at least break it
Yeah.
down as to figure out how many people around, even though, you know, those 4, you don't know when they tested positive, whether it was day 1, day 2, day 3, but you could break that down a little bit, but you still just know that of the people who are participating in the test and stay program, it is not resulting in a positive transmission. And so I think like that's still giving us really important information. We have people who don't want to participate in that, right? And that's okay, you know what I mean? But that makes it a little bit more difficult to determine if there was in-school transmission or not.
Right.
The other question to probably ask is, now with a lot, or if not the majority of our K through sixth graders being vaccinated, close to being fully vaccinated on the way, is that going to change potentially come, I don't know, January, February, how we're doing the test and stay program?
So right now, if you're vaccinated, you're not supposed to do the test and stay program. right?
Yeah.
Because if you're vaccinated and you're a close contact, then only if you're symptomatic
Right.
Yeah.
would you have to, right? So that is something that the commissioner said that they are examining,
Okay.
right? And that's one of the things that they talked about, even might they have a different approach in January versus right now, as far as people being able to utilize test and stay who weren't close contacts in school. That's something that they're talking about. They're still saying that no, it has to be an in-school close contact in order to utilize test and stay.
And to that point, especially given, I mean, testing is hard to come by right now for the average person, right? Like, you know, if you trying to buy a home kit is almost impossible right now. You know, even scheduling a PCR, I think, can be challenging. You know, where do I go? I don't. You saw the lines in New York City the past couple days for PCR testing. Do we start looking at, now that a good chunk of the student population is going to be vaccinated, test and stay becomes less and less utilized, looking at the symptomatic testing, and I have to go back and refresh my memory what that program looked like, but does that provide a way for us to test students whose families might be struggling to find testing? And so now we're gonna have a bunch of, especially with Omicron, we're gonna have a lot of vaccinated people getting Omicron who then say, I have some symptoms, but I don't even know where to get a test. Can we help with that? Do we, you know, does our relationship with the state and with the testing organization let us take those tests now and implement symptomatic testing to help more quickly identify students who have COVID who are still in the classroom because they just never have symptoms?
The symptomatic testing is an available part of the program from the state. We have concerns about doing that. We had concerns about implementing it early on, about the idea of whether or not people would be more inclined to send a child to school who should otherwise be staying home because they knew that they could just get tested at school, right?
Right.
Concerns like that I think the nurses see in real time every year, you know, because it can be difficult for somebody to stay home, and we understand that, but,
Right.
you know, we're really trying to encourage people to not send their potentially sick child to school at all. But we can continue to explore those conversations, and we can continue to say, you're right, if the impact on test and stay decreases because our vaccination rate increases, then that's a potential way that we can kind of rethink, I think, the specific, you know, the specific tasks that we're asking our district coordinator to undergo. So those are conversations that I think we can have.
And I'm thinking more of the well-meaning families who, you know, who weren't gonna send their kid to school and just don't know where to get tested.
Yep.
Like, I wanna test my child, I don't know where to go, oh, I can go to Millennium and have my child
Right.
tested? Great, because I don't wanna send them to school. Yeah, the people are just gonna send them slightly symptomatic, it's not gonna probably,
I think
it's not
it's,
gonna impact them, but.
the short answer is, as those things start to do this, I think we will continue to look at how we're using the resources we have.
Do we have to do any further application
No.
process to do that?
No.
We can use the tests and
I believe it's the
and
same test.
personnel
I mean,
as
it
we
is,
see
it's
fit.
still
Right,
just
the same
still
test.
just a rapid
I just
test,
didn't know if-
and it's the same test. It's more about, and that is one of the things to many family members, I think, dismay, is that the consent was for everything. Pool testing,
correct.
symptomatic
Yeah.
testing, and test and stay, and some people didn't like that. Some people have been clear that they will only consent to one thing, but that's one of the reasons why the state wouldn't let us change the
Form.
form
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
So,
But to that point, I wonder if the original concern from the nurses, which I understand, is they're trying to protect their building.
Yeah.
Right? So if the symptomatic testing remains at Millennium, then I think could be
Well,
really
it's very
valuable.
strict. The guidelines are strict in that symptomatic testing is for when a student during the school day, they show up to school
Oh,
totally
okay.
fine, and then they develop
Right.
a
Right.
mild symptom. Only then would they qualify. So
Okay.
the concern from the nurses is if they're sick at home, the parents may, you know, send them in, and then they've
Right.
been on the bus, and that,
Yeah.
when they've had symptoms. So
But that-
that's what we wanted to separate.
Right, and
And
I-
we don't have control over
No.
whether or not it's, you know, during the school day, that's
Right.
told to us.
But you can see as a tool for nurses like that, you know, middle of the day, one of the kids is sent and they're running a fever, and, you know, if nurses in each of the building have the option to rule something in or out pretty quickly as well, that information, as opposed to as a way for testing for families. It's just another tool, I think, for the nurses that might be helpful.
But that is
Yeah.
different than I was
Yeah.
envisioning the
Yeah.
use, and
Yes,
you're right, it wouldn't
thank you
work.
for that reminder.
Okay.
Anything else? Just everyone get boosted, stay safe. Yeah, I think January's gonna be a wild ride. Not a good one.
We'll move down to Florida to enjoy the sunshine.
Or that.
They went crazy the last time, didn't they, numbers-wise?
Motion to adjourn to executive session to discuss a strategy with respect to Unit C collective bargaining. As an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position, the committee will not return to public session.
Second.
Valerie with the motion, Alicia with the second. All in favor, roll call vote. Catherine?
Aye.
Ming Chen? Aye. Alicia?
Aye.
Valerie?
Aye.
Aye. Sean?
All right.
Gloria?
Aye.
We are-